I'm sorry, I just have to do the comparison versus video, okay? And in all objectivity, I don't think there's one right answer for everybody. Like, for certain people, affordability matters above all else, and for others, range or charging speed or number of seats and doors, that might matter more than all else. So it all just depends on your use cases, but it's very fun to do comparisons when there's clearly some overlap in market and direction. But can I just say from the beginning, I'm happy that there's actually multiple EV startups now pursuing a field that has been criminally underserved. There have not been enough mini trucks available, particularly in the United States, and I think most of us can agree in regards to electric vehicles, smaller is the way to go. Like, we're not seeing great sales or much efficiency with these giant, expensive electric trucks that, in my opinion, aren't that much more practical than what these mini trucks are capable of doing for a fraction of the price. And I'm thankful that there's multiple companies with different approaches to solve the same problem of behemoth pickup trucks in the United States. So I'm grateful for both, and I'm excited for both, but in today's video, yes, we are going to be comparing the two and saying where the pros and cons of each are, because the truth is, all vehicle design, all engineering really comes down to different levels of compromise. Where do you want to compromise the most to maximize some other feature or some other set of advantages? And ultimately, the cars we buy end up being the vehicles that compromise in the areas we don't care about and over prioritize in the areas we do care about. So first off, what does the Telo truck and the Slate truck have in common? Well, they're both pretty small relative to the US market. Both of them are smaller than a Ford Maverick. And while the Telo truck is just about 2 feet shorter than the Slate truck, both I think will be much easier to navigate than the best-selling pickup trucks right now, like the F-150 or the Ram 1500. They'll both have backup cameras, and they both have 5-foot beds, just with a little bit of a different layout on the inside. Like, for example, the Slate is just an inch or two narrower than the Telo truck, but that comes at the price of the wheel wells inside the bed being a lot closer together than the wheel wells in the Telo truck. See, when they were designing it, they wanted to make sure that you could fit a 4x8-foot sheet of plywood in the back with the tailgate up. So they made sure that the distance between the wheel wells was over 48 inches, whereas it's closer to about 42 inches in the Slate. And to their credit, they even rendered it out for that on the website. So when they show big sheets of plywood in the back, of course, the tailgate has to be down, and they show it stack on top of the wheel wells. Appreciate that little attention to detail there, but of course, there's a lot of compromises you have to make with the Slate pickup truck to get that insanely low price point, which personally, I still have a hard time believing, because even big legacy automakers with gas vehicles that don't have big battery packs to worry about, they're struggling to get their vehicles that cheap, and yet Slate is a startup aiming to take advantage of the federal EV tax credit to start below $20,000, but on the off chance that the current administration ends up ending the federal EV tax credit, which is possible. They've talked about doing it. They haven't done it yet, but both the Telo and the Slate aren't really supposed to be coming out at any kind of volume until at the soonest end of next year, and there's a lot, of course, in the White House that could change by then. So I'm just going to remove the federal EV tax credit from the discussion in this video, and let's just say that the blank Slate pickup truck with no options, no accessories, that's probably going to start around $27,000 before any incentives. And the Telo truck, keep in mind, also has a rear-wheel drive, smaller battery pack option that starts a little over $41,000. So there's no hiding it. Yes, the Telo truck is more expensive, but the question is that price delta going to be worth it to people? Because while the Telo may cost around $14,000 more than the base model Slate, that Slate truck is taking out a lot of different features to achieve that lower price point. For example, the base model Slate has a 150-mile range. Now, I mentioned in my previous videos, I respect that because we haven't seen EVs on the market for a while now that are still like federally approved and safe. You know, they have decent crumple zones and they can go highway speed, but actually achieve a range that low. I guess that means they're confident in the supercharger network and they're just comfortable with it maybe not being that great of a road trip experience, with the peak charge speed being 120 kilowatts. And of course, the Slate is a two-door vehicle. It's a two-seater by default. So in order to achieve a lot of the things that are standard on the Telo truck, there's going to be a lot of different add-ons and options. Like Slate talked about offering a second row of seats so that you could kind of convert it into an SUV. Not to mention the Slate doesn't have speakers on the inside. So if you like listening to podcasts or music as you're driving, you can supply your own Bluetooth speaker, which will sound okay, I guess. But the Telo, of course, will have a fully featured sound system on the interior cabin. 11, and even the base model cheapest Telo truck has a range of 260 miles. So that's over 100 miles more range on the Telo truck, even though it's a smaller footprint, and it includes that second row seats and 4 doors. Keep in mind, even if you get the SUV conversion kit for the Slate, it's still a 2-door, meaning if you want to put passengers or your kids in the back seat, you gotta open the front door, move the front seat forward, have them step in the back, which might be a deal breaker for some, but for others, if you like the lower price point, you might be willing to put up with that. But the Telo is also prioritizing having a much higher charging speed. There's a lot of work going into Telo's proprietary battery pack design, and they're rating it to accept charges over 250 kilowatts, but because most superchargers in the US max out at around 250, I would say the majority of the time that's probably what you're going to be getting with that smaller battery pack, but still more than twice the charging speed of what the Slate is going to get. And some of you might be quick to say, well, kilowatts doesn't really matter in the end. What matters is miles back per minute, which I'm very grateful you brought up, because the Telo truck, despite being smaller and having more range, actually is more energy efficient as well, targeting around 3.3 miles per kilowatt hour, whereas the Slate EV, according to their own battery pack and range numbers, that's targeting about 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour, and I would assume that's with no accessories, no add-ons. There's a good chance if you start adding mounts and racks and, you're adding overall weight to the vehicle, that could help or hurt the aero. But overall, the Slate EV, because I think it's a little bit taller than the Telo truck, and because it's not as aerodynamic of a shape, you're just going to be using more energy per mile, which means not only are you taking a time hit by peak charging at 120 kilowatts, you're also taking a time hit by using more energy per mile. So just expect a little bit longer charging stops with the Slate. And probably the biggest variable that makes it kind of difficult to compare the two in terms of price is that Slate, I have a feeling kind of intentionally, is keeping the pricing somewhat vague. All they've said is that after federal incentives, it will be under $20,000 for the base model. But that's the funny thing. I ran some polls over on Twitter and on YouTube and got several hundred people to vote in them. I know social media polls are not an exact science, but you do get a fairly large sample size, and it's probably the best data collection method we have at this time because Slate's not revealing the numbers yet. The vast majority of people voting on these polls, they have the option to say they're not buying a Slate, so I hope that improves the accuracy. But as far as asking people, do they want the base model 150 mile range, or do they want to spec up for the extended range option that gets you 240 miles, which is a lot closer to the 260 miles that the base model Telo truck gets. And you'll notice in both polls, it's not even close. Everybody's specking up for the 240 mile range option, and nowhere on Slate's website do they say what any of their add-on accessories actually cost. And if we're going to believe the early rumors that we were reading about the Slate pickup, which so far have proven to be pretty accurate with the unveiling and the specs and the design, the original business pitch for Slate as a business was to break even / maybe lose money on the base model Slate pickup truck. So if you're wondering how can they sell that, they can't really. They're kind of banking on the company buying all of these accessories and add-ons, and if the company's profits are really to be found in the accessories, there's a good chance, in my opinion, that means the accessories might not be as radically low priced as the pickup truck itself. If the whole company, which keep in mind takes a lot of money and requires a lot of cash to operate, keep an assembly line running, keeping factory employees paid and happy, paying for a battery pack supply chain and assembly process, paying for a factory where you build all of these composite panels. I'm really excited to learn more about that, by the way. There's lots of different composites you can make vehicle exteriors out of. Some of them kind of need to be wrapped, otherwise they kind of age over time. Slate has said that at least the materials for wrapping the Slate pickup truck would be around $500, and they're kind of offering you to wrap it yourself, but they also said we could do it for a fee. But again, most wraps don't last for the life of the vehicle, and it's possible that they might age over time, whereas of course Telo truck is just relying on simple painted aluminum body panels. That's what every other vehicle on the road except for the Cybertruck has these days. So my point is, it looks like 2/3 to 3/4 of a lot of the people excited for the Slate EV are most interested in the higher range option, and we have no clue what that higher range option cost. In my poll, I assumed it's about a $5,000 increase because they're basically adding around 30 kilowatt hours to the battery pack, which is quite a bit, honestly, if you consider that the base model Slate is a 50 kilowatt hour pack. You're adding another 30, that's like almost doubling the battery pack size. And again, some people might want the roof rack, some people might want interior accessories to be added, like speakers or a tablet of some kind for navigation if you don't want to do everything on your phone. Different tire options people might have to spec up for to get better range, or some people might want more seats in the back. All these kinds of things that a lot of us have come to expect when paying, tens of thousands of dollars for a brand new vehicle. And keep in mind, that's $25,000 with the tax credit. If you take that away and you add on a couple more accessories, this could very quickly become a $35,000 to $36,000 vehicle that you're still relying on a Bluetooth speaker for all of your sound playback. That might be too much for some people to compromise on. Maybe it's not, but I feel like at that low of a price point, you could really start comparing it to used Model 3s and Model Ys. Those are going to have much better charging speeds. They're going to have much more feature complete interiors with speakers and navigation systems and theater mode and that kind of thing. But I understand some people want a pickup truck, and a lot of people don't want to drive a Tesla for all kinds of different reasons. But as you try to achieve feature parity with other more affordable electric trucks on the market, I think you'll start to see that the price point Slate is advertising might be somewhat of a decoy effect. This is something that Apple does and automakers do all the time, where they build a really stripped down base model vehicle, but then they build almost none of them just so that they can advertise that low price point everywhere. And then once you spec it up to something you actually want and like, with the bigger battery pack or with the second row of seats, then you start going, wait a second, this is actually not that much cheaper than I initially thought. So I just think it's a little bit interesting that they decided to not talk about any of the accessory pricing. Telo, as soon as we added accessories to the configurator, we had at least ballpark prices that we're targeting for production. With the craziness of supply chains and tariffs, there might be some fluctuations, but I do think it should be mentioned that after the Slate unveil, the Telo truck actually got a big spike in pre-orders. And I hope that's because there's a lot more people now considering mini trucks now that they have options, and maybe it's a good thing that Slate is actually cutting back so much and taking out so many things, because now it feels like everybody has a vehicle that kind of caters towards them better. Rather than one company trying to fit the needs of the many, each company is kind of leaning into whatever advantages they can take advantage of. And most of the pre-orders for the Telo truck, by the way, are not for the base model. Most people interested in the Telo are getting the longer range all-wheel drive option, which is not even one of the add-ons they talked about for the Slate. It's rear-wheel drive only. So considering that the Telo truck was designed for 6,600 pounds of towing capacity, whereas the Slate was designed for 1,000 pounds, I think that in itself shows there's very, very different approaches to these two trucks. And in my opinion, if we were to zoom out a little bit and try to summarize this argument and not turn it into a big spreadsheet of numbers, I think ultimately what it comes down to is the Slate EV pickup truck, especially if they're comfortable selling a 150-mile range truck, it's kind of a secondary vehicle. It's a two-door, it's a two-seater. Those, of course, don't sell as well in the United States. Maybe they'll pick up now that there's an option so affordable. I'm excited to see how it performs, but for a lot of people, that's not going to be the family car. That's going to be the workman's vehicle. Maybe a lot of fleet buyers will be interested in that option if it's not driving too far. But I think the Telo truck from the beginning was very much looked at as a one-car solution. The Telo was not meant to be people's secondary vehicle. It was meant to be, you can fit car seats in the back. You can fit the whole family in there. You've still got a pickup truck that can road trip, 350 miles of range, really fast charging speeds, and all-wheel drive and great ground clearance for off-roading, driving through the snow or driving through the ice. And even in those winter months where oftentimes your range might get cut in half depending on how cold it is, or if you're towing a heavy trailer a decent amount of distance, that 350-mile range could get cut and you can probably still make it to different superchargers. Whereas the Slate, it's kind of like, well, it's not really meant for those use cases. And again, that's okay. There's different tools for different jobs, right? And for some people, they might not want a pickup truck as their one-car solution. They don't want one vehicle to fit the family in and get work done in. Maybe you want to buy a $30,000 or $40,000 crossover or sedan for commuting or getting the family around, but then you want to add the Slate as your secondary vehicle for getting some projects done. You don't care if it has a great sound system. You don't care about the infotainment. You just need a 5-foot bed and something that runs on electricity. So there's a two-car solution where I think the Slate could make a lot of sense for people. And then I also could see a demographic of people that don't want to have two separate car payments or two separate registrations or, two sets of tires or battery packs to maintain over time. They just want one vehicle that can kind of do it all. That can be the commuter, that can be efficient, that can have high range, fast charging, that can also fit a lot of stuff and can also go off-road and adventure with all-wheel drive. So depending on your budget or your use cases or your living situation, the two-car solution might make sense for you or the one-car solution might make sense to you. It just depends on the person. But I am super fascinated, particularly with that base model Slate. Is there a market in 2026 and onward for 150-mile range EVs, because to be honest, it's been attempted in the past. Like Tesla had a 60 kilowatt hour Model S that didn't even go 200 miles, didn't sell all of that great. Of course, the margins weren't all there, but also over time, Tesla and many other EV makers discovered this. There's kind of a sweet spot with electrification, and there were earlier, older EVs that tried to get by as being city cars and commuter vehicles and said, you know what, 100 miles of range is fine. You know, there was an original electric Ford Ranger. That didn't go very far. Or the original electric Toyota RAV4. These were compliance vehicles. Basically, the state of California forced the automakers to make these, and they didn't have that great range. But for some people, that was fine. They didn't use them for road tripping. They just used it for around town. And a great example to kind of see how the future of electrification went, it's not always about who can sell the cheapest car. Affordability is definitely a factor. You know, you can price yourself out of the competition, but keep in mind, two vehicles that were kind of competing head on early in the electrification game was the Nissan Leaf and the Tesla Roadster. Very, very different prices. And some would have argued, of course, the Nissan Leaf was more affordable and more practical, but that low range and that low margin vehicle didn't end up aging all that well. And even though it took Tesla many, many years to actually hit the same price point of the Nissan Leaf, some would argue they still haven't. Sometimes chasing the thicker margin on the upfront price of the vehicle can pay off in the long run, rather than trying to rely on economies of scale or razor thin margin vehicles, maybe even loss leaders that you make it back through accessories. And keep in mind, the accessory market is kind of a gamble for Slate, because what if people don't want to buy their Slate EV truck accessories from Slate? You know, maybe they can find it cheaper through a third party that's already cranking out all kinds of pickup truck accessories. But if Slate is banking on their accessories bringing in the profits, I don't know. Maybe you don't let third parties develop accessories all that easy, or maybe you got to price those accessories abnormally high. We just don't know yet what the pricing structure is on what Slate's real breadwinner is, which is why this is kind of a fascinating move. It could pay off for them, genuinely. I'm excited to see it because it really reminds me of my first vehicle, the Ford Ranger. But of course, now that I've learned so much about crumple zones and how they can be safe and small, and why we don't need big hoods on pickup trucks anymore, I've kind of fallen in love with the Telo just because I've spent so much time with it. And yes, it's nice to have a second row of seats and 4 doors. And I really like mid-gates, and it drives me nuts that not more pickup trucks have that option to extend the bed. And me and my wife were big fans of car camping, so having a way to run the HVAC all night and keep it enclosed, that's important to me. And just as I've been driving around for the past few days, I keep thinking, like, could I live with 150-mile range and with no speakers inside the car? Could I just Bluetooth speaker my way through car ownership? And boy, I'm all in favor of taking out unnecessary parts, but I gotta admit, I'm having a hard time accepting that. I kind of jam out to my car a lot. We watch a lot of TV in my Model 3 as is, and I also love listening to music and podcasts, and I love the basic sound system, even in pretty cheap cars. So I'm by no means an audiophile, but I don't know. I'm starting to think a Bluetooth speaker just might not cut it for me, at least if I'm spending very likely $25,000 to $30,000 on a vehicle. Maybe if I was spending like $15,000 to $10,000, it'd be easier to digest. That'll be interesting. Imagine what the used market for Slate EVs is going to be after a couple of years. How cheap can those things get, right? I don't know. Feel free to let me know all your thoughts on the comparisons and advantages between these two pickup trucks down in the comments below. And thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.